He built a life where no one could enter, just him, his land, and a dog that trusted no one but him. Then, one evening, a pregnant stranger stopped at his gate and asked for nothing, except the chance to stay. She didn't explain where she came from, and he didn't ask, but something about her didn't feel like a mistake. Days passed, and without trying to change his world, she slowly made it livable again. But the past doesn't stay quiet forever, and when it came back, it threatened to take everything with it. This isn't a story about being saved. It's about choosing not to walk away when it matters most. Where are you watching from, and what would you do in his place? If this story speaks to you, don't forget to like and subscribe so we can reach 1,000 and keep telling stories like this. The wind never really stopped in that part of Montana. It didn't howl, not today. It moved low and steady across the open land, slipping through broken fence lines and brushing over patches of snow that had yet to melt. Late winter had softened the cold, but it hadn't let go of it. The ground was still stiff beneath the surface, and the air carried that thin, biting edge that never quite left the valley. Ethan Cole stood near the far side of the paddock, one hand resting loosely against a wooden post that had started to lean months ago. He hadn't fixed it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The farm wasn't falling apart. It just wasn't being saved. That was the difference. He worked when something needed to hold. He stopped when it didn't. There was no plan beyond that. No future being built. Just maintenance. Enough to keep the place from collapsing in on itself. Nothing more. A faint creak moved through the fence as the wind shifted. Ethan didn't look up. He didn't need to. Ranger had already noticed. The German shepherd stood a few yards away, still as something carved into the landscape. 7 years old, built lean and tight, his coat carried a deep black along his back that spread wide like armor, fading into dark brown along his legs. One ear, his left, had a small tear at the edge, barely visible unless you knew where to look. He didn't bark. He never did unless it mattered. Instead, he shifted, just slightly. Weight forward, head angled, eyes locked on something beyond the fence line. That was enough. Ethan straightened, slow, deliberate. His hand slid off the post, and for a moment he didn't move. He followed the line of Ranger's gaze, scanning past the gate, past the stretch of road that cut through the land like it had somewhere else to be. Then he saw her. She wasn't close. Maybe 40 yards out, just beyond the gate. She stood there without moving, one hand wrapped around the handle of a worn leather suitcase, the other resting lightly against her stomach. Her coat, faded green, long enough to catch the wind, shifted around her legs, brushing against the snow-dusted ground. She wasn't trying to get in. She wasn't trying to leave either, just standing. Waiting, maybe. Or deciding. Ethan didn't walk toward her. Not yet. He watched. That was the first rule, always had been. Ranger moved before he did. Not fast, not aggressive, just a measured step forward, placing himself slightly ahead of Ethan's position, body angled, not blocking, not attacking, just there. A line drawn without words. The woman noticed the dog first. People always did. Her posture changed, not retreating, not advancing. Just a small shift in how she held herself, like she understood something important had already been decided and she hadn't been the one to decide it. Ethan started walking then. Boots pressing into the thin crust of snow, each step steady, unhurried. His jacket, camouflage faded by years of use, moved stiffly against his shoulders, the fabric worn soft at the elbows. The cold didn't bother him anymore, not in the way it used to. He stopped a few feet short of the gate, didn't reach for it, didn't speak. Up close, she looked younger than the road behind her suggested, mid-30s maybe. Her face held that kind of tired that didn't come from one bad night. It settled deeper than that. Her hair, dark and pulled back loosely, had strands slipping free, catching against her temples. Her eyes didn't drop when she met his. Brown, steady, no hesitation. That was new. Most people looked away first. Ranger shifted again, a half step closer this time, not enough to close the distance, just enough to remind her it could be closed. Ethan didn't stop him. "Don't come any closer," he said finally. His voice was low, even. Not a warning. Not exactly. A boundary. She nodded once, didn't move. For a moment nothing happened. The wind moved between them, carrying the dry scent of old wood and frozen earth. Somewhere behind Ethan, a loose board tapped softly against the side of the barn. Then she spoke. "I can work." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried clean through the space between them, shaped more by control than desperation. "I don't need anything else." Ethan didn't respond right away. He let the words sit there, watched how she stood after saying them, not leaning forward, not filling the silence with more, just letting it be enough. That was different. People usually kept talking when they were asking for something. They tried to explain, justify, convince. She didn't. Ranger's ears flicked just once. Ethan noticed. He always did. "What kind of work?" he asked. She glanced briefly past him, toward the structures scattered across the property, the barn with its sagging roofline, the fence that needed fixing, the land that had stopped pretending to be useful. "Whatever keeps the place standing," she said. A simple answer. Too simple. Ethan's gaze sharpened, just slightly. "You been on a farm before?" "No." That came without hesitation, another pause. "But I know how to fix things," she added. "Enough to earn my stay." Ranger moved again. This time it wasn't forward. He circled, slow, deliberate, creating a wider arc that placed himself between Ethan and the open side of the gate, adjusting angles like he was mapping out a problem that hadn't fully revealed itself yet. Ethan felt it. The shift. Not danger, not safety either. Something unresolved. His eyes dropped just for a second, to her hand, resting against her stomach. The curve was there, not subtle, not hidden. He looked back up. She didn't follow his gaze, didn't draw attention to it, didn't use it. That mattered more than anything she could have said. The wind picked up slightly, tugging at the edge of her coat. The suitcase at her side shifted with it, the leather creaking softly. It looked older than the rest of her, worn at the corners, carried for longer than something like that should have been. Ethan exhaled, slow. There were easier ways to deal with this. He could tell her to leave, close the distance, shut the gate, walk back to the house, and let the cold take care of the rest of the decision. That's what he would have done once, without thinking, without stopping. Ranger glanced back at him. Just a flick of the eyes, waiting. Not for a command, for a choice. Ethan didn't move, not forward, not back. The space between them held, unbroken, unresolved. Finally, he spoke again. "You're not coming in," he said. Her expression didn't change. "Not yet." A beat. Then, just a slight shift in her shoulders. Not relief, not disappointment, acceptance. "That's fine," she said. And for the first time since he'd seen her, something in Ethan's chest tightened, just enough to notice. Not because of what she asked, but because of what she didn't. She didn't argue, didn't push, didn't try to close the distance. She stayed exactly where she was. Outside the gate, where he'd decided she belonged, and for reasons he didn't want to look at too closely, he didn't send her away. They stood there a moment longer. Man, dog, stranger, 3 points in a space that hadn't changed in years, till now. Ethan didn't open the gate right away. When he finally did, it wasn't an invitation. It was a decision measured in inches. The hinges resisted, then gave with a dry groan that carried farther than it should have. The sound hung in the cold air, too loud for something that small. He didn't step aside. He didn't say welcome. He simply pointed. Past the main house, past the line of worn fencing, toward the far end of the property where the old horse stable leaned into the wind like it had been waiting to collapse for years. "There," he said. Hannah followed his gaze. The structure was barely more than a shadow against the pale snow. One side of the roof sagged lower than the other. The doors hung uneven, one half open, the other nailed shut at some point and never fixed. "Not inside," Ethan added, his voice flat. She nodded once. No argument, no hesitation. That was the first thing he noticed. Most people would have tried to negotiate, asked for something warmer, something closer. She picked up her suitcase and walked through the gate without looking back. Ranger moved with her, but not beside her. He kept his distance, circling wide, positioning himself so that no matter where she stepped, he had a clear line between her and Ethan. It wasn't hostility. It was control. The stable smelled like old wood and time. Dust layered the ground in uneven patches where snow hadn't reached. Broken boards lined one wall, stacked without purpose. A rusted horseshoe hung loose from a nail, tapping softly whenever the wind slipped through the cracks. Hannah set her suitcase down near the far corner, where the roof still held. She stood there for a moment, just looking, taking in the space without reacting to it. Then she started working. No rush, no wasted movement. She cleared a patch of ground first, then dragged a few boards into place, laying them flat as a barrier between herself and the cold dirt. She found an old tarp folded behind a beam, shook it out, and secured it across one side where the wind came through strongest. Ethan watched from a distance. He didn't offer help. He didn't need to. This wasn't about making it easier. It was about seeing what she would do when it wasn't. The first night dropped colder than the day had promised. The sky cleared, pulling the warmth away with it. By the time the moon rose, the temperature had settled into something sharper, thinner, like the air itself had edges. Ethan sat inside, near the small table by the window. A single lamp cast a dull light across the room, barely touching the corners. The rest stayed in shadow. Ranger wasn't there. That wasn't unusual, but it wasn't nothing either. Ethan didn't go looking for him, not yet. He waited. Minutes passed, then more. The wind shifted, brushing lightly against the glass. Still nothing. He stood, not fast, not alarmed, just enough. When he stepped outside, the cold hit harder than before, cutting through the fabric of his jacket, pressing against his chest like it had something to prove. The stable stood dark at the far edge of the property. A faint movement near the entrance caught his eye. Ranger, sitting, not pacing, not alert, just sitting, facing inward. Ethan stopped where he was. Didn't call out, didn't move closer. He watched. Ranger didn't turn back, didn't acknowledge him. That was the second thing. The dog wasn't guarding against her. He was holding position. Ethan stayed there longer than he intended. Then he turned and went back inside. Morning came without color. The sky stayed pale, the sun hidden somewhere behind a layer of thin cloud that gave no warmth, only light. Ethan stepped outside early, the same as always. The first thing he noticed wasn't the cold. It was the silence. No running water. That wasn't right. He moved toward the pump beside the house, crouched, checked the line. The metal felt wrong under his hand, too rigid, frozen, completely. He stood there for a moment, considering. The system hadn't failed like this in years, not entirely. Behind him, a sound, not loud, a scrape. He turned. Hannah was already there. She hadn't approached during the night, hadn't asked for anything, but now she stood a few feet away watching the pipe with the same still focus she'd had the day before. "You've got a full freeze," she said. Not a question. Ethan didn't respond. She stepped closer, but not past Ranger. The dog had moved again, placing himself between them, angled slightly toward her, close enough to stop her if needed. Not close enough to touch. Hannah paused there, waited. Ethan didn't give a command. After a moment, Ranger shifted, just enough to allow her space to move forward, but never breaking the line between her and him. She crouched near the pipe, running her fingers along the metal, tapping once, then again, listening to the hollow sound travel through it. "Main line's solid," she said quietly. "If you try to force it, you'll crack the joint." Ethan crossed his arms. "You got a better idea?" She didn't look up. "Heat it from the outside first, slow. Keep pressure off until it gives." He didn't move, didn't agree, didn't disagree. Hannah glanced around, scanning the area. Her eyes settled on a small pile of scrap wood stacked near the fence. "Can I use that?" she asked. A simple question. Ethan nodded once. That was enough. It took time. She didn't rush it. She built a small controlled fire near the base of the pipe, careful not to let the flame touch the metal directly. Instead, she angled the heat, letting it rise slowly, evenly. Ranger stayed close, not interfering, watching every movement. Ethan stood back, arms still crossed, his gaze fixed, not on her, but on what she was doing, not judging, measuring. The fire crackled softly, the only sound cutting through the quiet. Minutes stretched, then a faint shift, a sound so small it almost didn't register. Hannah leaned in, adjusting the position of the heat. "Almost," she murmured. "Another minute." Then the pipe gave, a low, subtle creak, followed by the first trickle of water forcing its way through the line. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Hannah stepped back, letting the system settle. She didn't smile, didn't look for approval, just wiped her hands against her jeans and moved away. Ethan watched the water run. Then he looked at her. really looked this time. Not at the coat, not at the suitcase, at the way she worked, at the way she didn't wait to be told, at the way she didn't ask what came next. Ranger shifted. For the first time since she'd arrived, he turned his head, just slightly, away from her. Not fully, but enough. Ethan noticed that too. He always did. They didn't speak after that, not right away. Hannah returned to the stable, continuing her work like nothing had happened. Ethan stayed by the pump a moment longer. The water kept running, steady now, reliable. He let out a slow breath, barely visible in the cold air. Then he turned back toward the house, not closing the distance, but not increasing it either. Something had shifted, not trust, not yet, but something close enough to it that it mattered. The farm didn't change all at once. It shifted in pieces, small, practical, almost unnoticeable unless you were looking for it. A door that used to catch against the frame now closed cleanly. The hinge no longer complained when the wind pushed against it. A loose board along the side of the barn had been secured, not replaced, just reinforced enough to hold. Hannah didn't rebuild anything. She didn't rearrange, didn't claim space that wasn't hers. She only worked on what had already been there, things that had been left unfinished long enough to become invisible. Ethan noticed, not because the place looked different, because it felt less neglected. That was harder to ignore. 3 days passed without a conversation longer than a sentence. Ethan kept his routine. Up before light, outside before the cold settled too deep, checking fence lines, clearing snow where it mattered, leaving it where it didn't. Hannah moved through her own rhythm. She worked when there was something to fix, rested when there wasn't, ate little, slept in the stable even after the nights grew slightly warmer. She didn't ask to come inside, didn't test the boundary. That, more than anything, kept Ethan from pushing her further out. The stove was the first thing she touched inside the house. It had been unreliable for months. Ethan had adjusted to it, learned how to work around its temper, how to coax heat out of it without expecting consistency. Hannah didn't ask permission to fix it. She stood in the doorway first, waited. Ethan was at the table, a cup of coffee cooling in his hand. He looked up once, met her eyes, then looked back down. That was enough. She stepped in. Ranger followed immediately, placing himself just behind her left side, angled toward Ethan, as if reminding both of them exactly where the lines still were. Hannah crouched by the stove, examining it without touching it first. Her fingers hovered just above the metal, tracing heat patterns that weren't visible to anyone else. Then she started. No commentary, no explanation. She pulled the front panel loose, set it aside carefully, adjusted a warped section near the burner, cleaned out a buildup of ash that had settled too deep for casual maintenance. Ethan didn't interrupt. He watched, not closely enough to interfere, but not loosely enough to ignore. The work didn't take long. 15 minutes, maybe 20. When she finished, she stood, wiped her hands against her jeans, and stepped back. "Try it now," she said. Ethan didn't move immediately. Then he set the cup down, walked over, and lit the stove. The flame caught. Clean, steady. No hesitation. He stared at it longer than necessary. Then he turned back to her. "Where'd you learn that?" Hannah shrugged slightly. "Same place you learn anything else. When it stops working, you figure it out." Not a full answer, but not empty either. Ethan didn't push. The first car came mid-morning. Ethan heard it before it reached the gate. Tires on gravel carried differently out there, sharp, uneven, impossible to mistake for anything else. Hannah heard it too. Her reaction was subtle, a pause, nothing more. But Ethan saw it. The way her shoulders tightened, not enough for anyone else to notice. The way her gaze shifted, not toward the road but toward the nearest exit, always the exit. Ranger moved immediately, not toward the car, toward her. He positioned himself slightly in front of her path, not blocking, just present, adjusting the space around her like it mattered. Ethan stepped outside. The car rolled to a stop near the gate, an older pickup, dust along the sides, no rush in the way it had approached. The door opened slowly. Martha Hale stepped down. She moved with the kind of ease that came from knowing the land better than the road leading to it. Short, solid, wrapped in a heavy brown coat that had seen more winters than most people cared to count. A wool scarf sat tight around her neck, tucked in with practiced hands. Her hair was pulled back, gray and practical, but her eyes, sharp, steady, missed nothing. "Morning?" she called out. Ethan gave a small nod. "Martha." She closed the truck door without slamming it, took her time walking up to the gate, her gaze drifting past Ethan, settling, briefly, on Hannah. Not long, but long enough. "Well," Martha said lightly, though there was nothing casual in it. "That's new." Ethan didn't respond. Martha leaned one elbow against the fence post, her posture relaxed in a way that suggested she wasn't leaving any time soon. "Didn't figure you for the type," she added. Ethan met her eyes. "I'm not." She smiled. Faint. Her attention shifted again, this time slower, more deliberate, back to Hannah. The distance between them held. Hannah didn't step forward, didn't step back, just stood there, one hand resting lightly against her coat, eyes steady but unreadable. Martha studied her. Not rudely. Not kindly either, just thoroughly. Then she turned slightly, lowering her voice, not enough that it couldn't be overheard, but enough that it wasn't meant for Hannah. "She's not lost." Ethan didn't look away. "No." Martha nodded once, as if confirming something she'd already decided. "She's running." A pause. "From what?" Ethan's jaw tightened just slightly. "Haven't asked." Martha's eyes flicked back to him. "That's not like you." Ethan didn't answer. Didn't need to. Martha let the silence sit there for a moment, then pushed off the fence. "Well," she said, adjusting her gloves, "you keep doing what you're doing." She walked back to her truck, but before she climbed in, she glanced once more over her shoulder. "Just don't pretend you don't see it." Then she left. The sound of the engine faded slowly, swallowed by the open land. Silence returned, but it wasn't the same as before. Ethan stayed by the gate a moment longer. Then he turned back. Hannah was already moving, not toward him, toward the stable, like the conversation had nothing to do with her, or everything. That afternoon, the wind picked up again. Colder this time, sharper. Ethan worked along the far fence, replacing a broken section that had finally given in. The wood resisted, stiff with cold, but it held once it was set. He didn't notice Ranger move until the dog was already halfway across the field. Fast, direct, not alarmed, focused. Ethan straightened, following the line. Hannah stood near the edge of the property, just beyond the stable. Not far, but far enough. Her back was to him, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something distant. There was nothing there, no car, no movement, just the wind. Ranger stopped a few feet from her, didn't bark, didn't circle, just stood, watching, waiting. Ethan approached slower this time. When he got close enough, he saw it. Her hand wasn't resting loosely anymore. It pressed against her side, fingers curled slightly, not from pain, but from tension. "You expecting someone?" he asked. She didn't turn around immediately. "No." The answer came too quickly, too clean. Ethan let the silence stretch. "You hear something?" he asked. Hannah shook her head. Then, after a moment, "I thought I did." She turned then, finally meeting his eyes. For the first time since she'd arrived, there was something there that hadn't been before. Not fear, not exactly, recognition. Of something she knew might come, or might not. Ranger shifted again, stepping closer, not between them this time, beside her, just enough. Ethan noticed that. He always did. They walked back without speaking. The distance between them had changed, not smaller, just different. Less about keeping apart, more about knowing where the other stood. The light came in softer that afternoon. Not warmer, just quieter. Cloud cover stretched thin across the sky, muting the edges of everything. The snow didn't glare the way it had in the past few days. The land seemed dimmed, like something had been turned down without anyone noticing. Ethan was inside when Hannah stepped into the house again. This time, she didn't wait at the door as long. She paused, yes, but not to ask, not even to look at him for permission, just long enough to take in the space, then move forward. Ranger followed her in a slower arc, not tight at her side, not distant either. His steps were measured, deliberate, as if he had already decided she belonged in this space, but not fully. Not yet. Ethan didn't say anything. He sat at the table, one elbow resting near the edge, fingers loosely curled around an empty mug. He watched her in the way he watched everything else, quietly, without interruption, but never without attention. "The stove still running clean?" she asked, without looking at him. "Mostly." A pause. "Sometimes it dips." She nodded once and moved toward it. The kitchen held the kind of silence that didn't come from emptiness. It came from disuse. Everything was where it should have been. Nothing was where it needed to be. A jacket hung off the back of a chair, one sleeve brushing the floor. A folded piece of paper sat near the edge of the table, untouched long enough to curl slightly at the corners. A box in the corner remained unopened. Dust settled across its top in a thin, even layer. Hannah didn't touch any of that. She went straight to the stove, pulled the front panel open again, slower this time, more precise, adjusted the alignment of a valve that had likely shifted from uneven heat cycles. Her fingers moved with quiet certainty, not rushed, not hesitant. Ranger settled near the doorway, not guarding, not resting either. His body faced her, but his head remained angled toward Ethan, like he was tracking two separate points at once. A balance. Ethan stood after a while, not because he needed to, because staying seated started to feel like avoiding something. He moved to the sink, ran the water just enough to hear it, then shut it off again. A habit, noise where silence pressed too long. He turned, leaning lightly against the counter. Hannah didn't acknowledge the movement, but she noticed. He could tell. "You don't use half the things in here," she said after a while. Not a judgment, just an observation. Ethan shrugged slightly. "Don't need to." She tightened a fitting, tested the burner again. The flame steadied, held. Then she stood. This time, instead of stepping back immediately, she stayed where she was, her gaze shifting, not aimlessly, but with intent. That was when she saw it. The photograph. It wasn't hidden. Just not displayed either. Leaning against the wall, half behind a stack of old mail, as if it had been moved there once and never returned to wherever it had belonged. Hannah didn't reach for it right away. She walked closer, slowly. Ranger's head lifted, not sharply, just enough. Ethan noticed. He always noticed. Hannah picked the frame up with both hands, careful, like it might fall apart if she didn't hold it evenly. The glass was slightly clouded along the edges. Not broken, just aged. In the picture, Ethan stood beside a woman, younger, cleaner, less worn. The woman leaned into him slightly, her smile open, unguarded. Her hand rested against his chest in a way that assumed permanence, like nothing about that moment could change. Hannah looked at it longer than she meant to. Then she glanced back at him. Ethan didn't look away, didn't move. "That your wife?" she asked. His answer came without hesitation. "Was." No shift in tone, no weight added to the word, just fact. Hannah nodded slowly, eyes returning to the photograph. "She doesn't live here anymore." Another statement. Not a question. Ethan pushed off the counter, taking a step closer, not toward her, but toward the space between them. "No." A beat. She left. He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with something both of them understood without saying. Hannah lowered the frame slightly, not setting it down yet. She had a reason, she said. It wasn't sympathy. It wasn't defense either. Just acknowledgement. Ethan's jaw tightened. Not visibly, not in a way most people would catch, but it was there. "People always do," he said. That was all. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind brushed lightly against the side of the house, a low, steady pressure that didn't quite turn into sound. Hannah placed the photograph back exactly where she'd found it. Same angle, same position, like she hadn't touched it at all. Then she stepped back. That could have been the end of it. A line crossed, then restored. But something lingered. Not in the room. In her. She hesitated. Not long, but long enough to matter. Then she said quietly, "Sometimes leaving isn't about wanting to go." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He watched her. Not as a stranger now. Not quite. "Then what is it about?" he asked. Hannah didn't answer right away. Her gaze dropped not to the floor, but somewhere just past it, like she was looking at something that wasn't there anymore. "Surviving," she said finally. The words settled differently. Heavier. Not dramatic. Not emphasized. Just real. Ethan held her gaze a moment longer, then nodded once. Not agreement, recognition. Ranger shifted. This time it was more obvious. He rose from where he'd been lying and moved closer, not directly to her, not directly to Ethan, but to the space between the stove and the table. He lay down again, stretching out just enough that his body angled toward Hannah, but his eyes stayed on Ethan. No tension, no warning, just presence. That was new. Ethan saw it. He didn't comment, but he saw it. Hannah turned back to the stove, checking the flame one last time. "It should hold now," she said. Ethan nodded. "Good." She wiped her hands again, then moved toward the door. This time, she didn't pause, didn't wait. She stepped out like she knew where the boundary was and how far she was allowed to cross it. Ranger didn't follow immediately. He stayed where he was, watching her leave. Then he looked back at Ethan, held the look a second longer than usual, then stood and moved after her. The door closed with a soft, hollow sound. Ethan remained where he was. The room felt different, not warmer, not fuller, just less distant. He walked over to the table, picked up the photograph without thinking, looked at it, really looked, not at the past, at what it had been. Then he set it down again, not in the same place, slightly forward, more visible. He didn't notice that he'd done it, but something had shifted, not in the house, in him. The sound of the engine carried differently this time. It wasn't like Martha's truck, steady, familiar, expected in a place where distance made neighbors noticeable. This one came faster, sharper. Tires bit into the gravel road without hesitation, like whoever was driving had already decided where they were going long before they arrived. Ethan heard it from inside. He didn't move right away. He stood near the counter, one hand resting against the edge, listening, not just to the engine, but to how it approached. There was no slowing too early, no cautious roll, direct, purposeful. Ranger reacted before the vehicle came into view, not with tension, not with aggression, with certainty. He rose from his place near the doorway and moved outside without waiting. Ethan followed. The car stopped just short of the gate. A dark sedan, cleaner than anything that usually came this far out. The kind of vehicle that didn't belong to this land, not because it couldn't handle it, but because it wasn't meant to. The engine cut. Silence settled in its place. For a second, nothing happened. Then the door opened. She stepped out slowly. Laura Cole. Time hadn't changed her as much as distance had. She still carried herself the same way, back straight, movements controlled, like she expected the world to hold its shape if she held hers. Her coat was light-colored, too clean for the dust that clung to everything out here. Her hair fell neatly over her shoulders, untouched by the wind in a way that felt almost deliberate, but her eyes, those had shifted. Not softer, just less certain. Ethan didn't step forward. He didn't step back either. He stayed where he was. Ranger positioned himself a half step ahead, body angled, not toward her, but toward the space between her and Ethan, a boundary already in place. Laura closed the car door with care, as if the sound mattered. Then she walked toward the gate. Not rushed, not hesitant. Each step measured, like she was trying to remember something she used to know by instinct. When she stopped at the fence, she didn't reach for it. She looked at Ethan first. Really looked. Like she was searching for something that might not be there anymore. "You look the same," she said. It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't an accusation either. Just an observation that didn't quite land. Ethan didn't respond. He waited. Laura exhaled lightly, her breath barely visible in the cold. "I wasn't sure you'd still be here." "I am." Simple. Final. She nodded, like she had expected that answer. Of course she had. Hannah stood near the edge of the stable, far enough that she wasn't part of the conversation, but not far enough to disappear from it. She hadn't come closer, hadn't stepped inside. She stayed exactly where she could see both of them, but remain outside whatever this was. Ranger noticed. His position shifted, not dramatically, just enough that his line of awareness stretched wider now, accounting for both women at once. Ethan noticed that too. He always did. Laura's gaze drifted past him then, not immediately, not carelessly. It took a moment before it settled on Hannah. And when it did, something changed, subtle at first, a tightening in the way she held her shoulders, a flicker in her eyes that hadn't been there seconds before, recognition, not of who Hannah was, but of what she represented. "Who's that?" she asked. Her voice stayed even, but it wasn't neutral anymore. Ethan didn't turn to look. "Someone staying here?" That was all he gave. Laura's eyes lingered on Hannah a second longer. Then she looked back at him. In our house? There it was. Not anger. Not yet. But something sharper than curiosity. Ethan's expression didn't shift. This isn't our house. The words landed clean. No emphasis, no force. That made them heavier. Laura blinked once, the first real crack in her composure. That's not what I meant. It is. Silence pressed in around them. The wind moved again, brushing past the fence, carrying dust and cold with it. Laura's hands tightened slightly at her sides. She wasn't used to being corrected like that. Not by him, not here. I came to talk, she said after a moment. Ethan nodded once. You're talking. Her jaw tightened. That's not fair. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Fair wasn't part of this. She stepped closer to the gate, not crossing it, but testing the space. I made a mistake, she said. The words came slower now, less controlled. I thought I knew what I wanted. I thought... She stopped. Not because she didn't have more to say, because saying it out loud made it real in a way she couldn't shape anymore. Ethan watched her. Not cold, not forgiving, just present. I left, she said finally. Yes. No judgment, no comfort either, just truth. Laura let out a breath that almost turned into a laugh, but didn't quite make it. I didn't think it would end the way it did. That's how leaving works. The sentence wasn't harsh, but it didn't leave space for argument. Hannah shifted slightly where she stood. Not stepping forward, just adjusting her weight. Ranger's ears flicked once in her direction, then settled again. He didn't move. He held the line. Laura followed the movement. Her eyes returned to Hannah. This time she didn't look away quickly. She studied her. The coat, the stance, the way she stood like she didn't belong but wasn't trying to. And then, slower. Her gaze dropped, to the curve beneath Hannah's coat. That was when everything changed. Not loudly, not suddenly, but completely. Laura's expression tightened, not in confusion, but in something far more familiar. Something sharper. So that's what this is, she said. Ethan's brow shifted slightly. What is? Laura let out a short breath, her voice losing the last of its steadiness. You move on that fast? The accusation came quietly, but it hit harder that way. Ethan didn't react, because there was nothing to react to. You think that's what this is? He asked. Laura didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. Hannah spoke then, for the first time since the car had arrived. I'm not... She stopped, not because she didn't know what to say, because she realized it wouldn't matter. Instead, she said something simpler. I'm just staying here. Her voice was calm, even, no defense in it, no apology either. That seemed to unsettle Laura more than anything else. Then don't, Laura said. The words came faster now, sharper. You don't belong here. The sentence hung in the air. Hannah didn't respond, didn't argue. She just stood there a second longer, then turned, not toward the house, toward the stable, walking away from the conversation like it had nothing left for her. Ethan watched her go. Didn't call her back, didn't stop her. That choice, more than anything he could have said, shifted something in the space between him and Laura. You're just going to let her walk away? Laura asked. Ethan looked back at her. She's not yours to send. Another pause, then quieter. And she's not mine to stop. That landed differently. Laura felt it. He could see it in the way her shoulders dropped, just slightly, but enough. The fight drained out of her faster than it had built. For a moment she looked tired, not defeated, just out of place. I didn't come here for this, she said. Ethan nodded. I know. She hesitated, then stepped back from the gate, not leaving yet, but no longer trying to cross it. I thought, she started, then stopped. Whatever she thought didn't fit here anymore, not the way she remembered it. The wind picked up again, colder now, the kind that reminded you things didn't stay the same just because you wanted them to. Laura looked at him one last time. Not searching this time, not expecting, just seeing. Then she turned, walked back to the car, opened the door, paused for a fraction of a second. Like she might say something else. She didn't. She got in, The engine started, and just like that, she was gone. Ethan stood there a moment longer, then turned toward the stable. Hannah was already inside, the door half closed. Ranger moved toward it, stopping just outside. He didn't go in. He didn't stay back either. He lay down in the space between the two worlds again, watching, waiting. Night came in quietly, but it didn't settle. The air shifted after sunset, colder than it had been all day, sharper, like something had been waiting just beyond the horizon, and finally stepped in when no one was looking. Ethan stayed outside longer than usual, not working, just moving. From the fence to the barn, from the barn to the edge of the property, not checking anything specific, just not going inside. The silence from earlier hadn't gone away. It had changed shape. Laura's visit had left something behind, not words, not conflict, something less defined, something that didn't belong to the land but hadn't left with her either. Ranger followed him at a distance, not glued to his side, not drifting off, just present. That was enough. Inside the stable, Hannah packed without rushing. She didn't start immediately after Laura left. She waited, sat for a while on the makeshift board she'd laid out days earlier, hands resting loosely in her lap, eyes unfocused, not lost, not distant, just still. Then, eventually, she stood. The suitcase lay where she had left it, worn leather, edges softened by time. It had been with her longer than anything else. She knelt beside it, opened it halfway, then paused. There wasn't much inside. A few clothes, folded carefully. A small bundle wrapped in cloth, something tucked at the bottom she didn't take out. She adjusted things that didn't need adjusting, then closed it. The latch clicked softly. That was the loudest sound in the room. Outside, the wind picked up again. Loose boards along the stable wall shifted, knocking lightly against their frames. Ethan stopped near the fence. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew. Not how, not why, just that something had moved. Hannah stepped out of the stable a few minutes later. The night had deepened, the sky stretching clear and wide above the land. The kind of darkness that didn't hide anything. It just made everything feel farther away. She didn't head toward the house. She didn't hesitate either. She walked straight toward the gate, suitcase in one hand, the other resting briefly against her side before dropping again. Ranger fell into step beside her, not ahead, not behind, close enough that their shadows moved together under the faint light. He didn't make a sound. Neither did she. The gravel shifted under her boots with each step, steady, unrushed, final. Ethan turned then, not sharply, not suddenly, just enough to face them. He didn't call out. He watched. That was what he had always done, what he had always relied on. Distance, observation, let people make their own decisions, let them leave if they needed to. That had worked before. It had kept things simple, clean. But something about the way she walked now didn't feel like a decision. It felt like a correction, like she was putting something back where it didn't belong in the first place. Hannah reached the gate. The metal latch was stiff from the cold. She adjusted her grip, shifting the suitcase slightly, freeing one hand. Ranger stopped, just short of the gate. He didn't step ahead this time. He didn't block her. He simply stood, watching. Hannah pulled the latch. It resisted, then gave with a dull snap. She pushed the gate open halfway. The wind slipped through immediately, sharper beyond the boundary than within it. She took a step forward. Just one. That was all it took. Ranger moved, not fast, not aggressive, precise. He stepped in, lowered his head, and took hold of the strap of her suitcase. No growl, no force, just held it. Hannah stopped. She didn't pull back right away, didn't look down immediately either. She stood there, half in, half out of the gate. The wind moved around them, lifting the edge of her coat. "Ranger," she said quietly. The dog didn't respond, didn't tighten his grip, didn't loosen it either. He simply held. Ethan closed the distance then. Not running, not urgent, just walking. Each step measured, the sound of his boots muted against the cold ground. He stopped a few feet away, close enough now that the space between them wasn't abstract anymore. Hannah finally looked down at the dog, then up at Ethan. There was no anger in her expression, no frustration, just something quieter. "I shouldn't stay," she said. It wasn't a question. Ethan nodded slightly. I know. That might have been the end of it. It would have been once. He would have stepped back, let her go, let the space close again. But he didn't. Not this time. He glanced at Ranger, then back at her. I'm not good at asking people to stay, he said. His voice stayed even. No strain, no hesitation, just truth. But you shouldn't be out there on your own right now. The words settled differently than anything else he had said since she arrived. Not an order, not a favor, a line drawn in a different direction. Hannah didn't answer immediately. Her fingers tightened slightly around the handle of the suitcase, then loosened again. She looked at Ranger, still holding the strap, still unmoving, then back at Ethan. You don't even know why I'm here, she said. Ethan nodded. You're here. That was all. No follow-up, no demand for explanation, just acceptance of what was already in front of him. The wind shifted again, colder this time. Hannah's shoulders dropped, just a fraction. Not in defeat, in release. Like something she had been holding in place finally gave way. Slowly, she let go of the suitcase. Her hand fell to her side. Ranger held the strap a second longer, then released it. The bag dropped lightly against the ground. The gate remained open, but neither of them moved through it. Ethan stepped forward, reached for the gate, and closed it. The latch clicked back into place, firm, final. Hannah watched him, not questioning, not resisting, just there. All right, she said quietly. Not agreement, not surrender, something else, something closer to choosing. They walked back without speaking. Not together, not separate, just along the same line. Ranger moved between them again. Not dividing, balancing. Inside the stable, Hannah set the suitcase down where it had been before. This time she didn't open it, didn't rearrange anything. She just stood there a moment longer, then sat. Ethan didn't step inside. He stayed near the doorway, the threshold, the place where things shifted from one state to another. You can use the room in the house, he said after a moment. Hannah looked up, didn't respond right away. That wasn't a small offer. It wasn't about comfort. It was about space, about trust, or at least something moving toward it. She shook her head slightly. Not yet. Ethan nodded once, didn't argue, didn't push. That was enough. Ranger lay down between them again, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but not asleep. Never fully asleep. The stable settled into quiet. But it wasn't the same quiet as before. It wasn't empty. It held something now, not belonging, not safety, but something that hadn't been there when she first arrived, a place she hadn't earned, and hadn't been given, but had been allowed to stay in. Time didn't announce itself when it passed. It moved quietly through the farm, settling into routines, reshaping them without asking. The snow began to thin along the edges of the fields, revealing patches of earth that had been held down for months. The wind still came, but it no longer cut the same way. It carried something softer now. Ethan noticed it first in the mornings, not in the air, in the house. There were sounds where there hadn't been any before. Footsteps, movement, small, ordinary things that didn't belong to him alone. He didn't comment on it. He just adjusted. The room at the end of the hallway had stayed closed for a long time. Not locked, just unused. The door had always opened easily. That wasn't the problem. It was what it led to. One morning, Ethan walked down the hallway without thinking too much about why. The light from the kitchen followed him part way, then fell off as he reached the end. He stood there for a second, then opened the door. Dust settled across the floor in a thin layer. The window hadn't been opened in months, maybe longer. The air inside felt still, untouched. Ethan stepped in. He didn't pause, didn't look around like he was remembering something. He went straight to the window, pushed it open. Cold air rushed in, sharp but clean, carrying the scent of thawing ground and distant pine. It moved through the room quickly, lifting the dust, shifting it. He wiped the glass with his sleeve until it caught the light again. Then he got to work. He didn't do everything at once. That wasn't how he worked. He fixed what was in front of him. The window frame first, tightened the loose hinge so it wouldn't rattle in the wind. Then the floorboards, checking each one for give, reinforcing the ones that needed it. The bed frame took longer. It had been pushed against the wall, unused, one side slightly uneven. He adjusted it, tested the joints, tightened them until the structure held firm again. No rush, no hesitation, just steady work. Hannah noticed without asking. She passed by the room more than once, her steps slowing each time just enough to see what had changed. She didn't step inside, not yet, but her presence lingered at the doorway longer each day, not curious, not cautious, just aware. The cradle came from the shed. Ethan hadn't opened that space properly in years. The door stuck halfway, wood swollen from seasons of cold and heat. He forced it open with his shoulder, stepping into the dim interior where everything had been left exactly as it was, covered, forgotten, or avoided. He moved through it slowly, shifting things aside. Old tools, broken boards, a folded tarp that smelled faintly of dust and oil. Then he found it. The cradle sat near the back, partially hidden under a worn sheet. Ethan stood still. His hand rested lightly against the edge before he pulled the cover away. The wood held up well, solid, even after all this time. The surface was dull but not damaged, built carefully, if not perfectly. He brushed the dust away, didn't stop, didn't hesitate. He carried it outside into the light. Hannah saw it from the doorway. She didn't step forward, didn't speak, but something in her expression shifted, small, almost imperceptible. Not surprise, recognition, of effort, of intention. Later that evening, the first real contraction came. It wasn't sudden. Hannah felt it before it showed. She was in the kitchen, standing near the counter, one hand resting lightly against the edge. Then her posture changed. A tightening. A pause. Ethan noticed immediately. He didn't ask what was wrong. He already knew. "You ready?" he said. She nodded once. That was enough. The truck started on the first turn. Gravel scattered behind them as Ethan drove out onto the road, the headlights cutting through the early darkness. Ranger climbed into the back without being told, his body low, steady, eyes fixed forward. No one spoke during the drive. There wasn't anything to say. The road stretched out ahead, empty at that hour. The sky still dark, just beginning to shift at the edges. The hospital lights felt too bright, too clean, too controlled. Ethan stayed just outside the room at first, not because he didn't want to be inside, because he didn't know where he fit in it. Ranger lay near the wall, alert, head lifting every time a sound changed. Time didn't move the same way there. Minutes stretched, then broke, and finally, a cry. Clear, strong. Ethan exhaled slowly, like he had been holding it longer than he realized. A nurse stepped out, her voice calm. "It's a boy." Hannah held him first. Wrapped in white, small but steady, his breathing uneven but strong. Ethan stepped closer. Not fast, not hesitant, just careful. "Name?" the nurse asked. Hannah looked down at the child, then across the room. "Noah," she said. The name settled into the space without resistance. The days after didn't follow a pattern. Sleep came in fragments, time blurred. But the house changed, not in structure, in presence. Ethan learned quietly how to hold the child without shifting too much, how to listen for the small sounds that meant something needed attention. He didn't ask questions. He watched, adjusted, stayed. Ranger stayed near the cradle, not touching, not crowding, just close enough. Every movement drew his attention. Every small sound lifted his head. He didn't guard the child the way he guarded the land. He watched, like he understood something had changed. The man arrived on a clear afternoon. The snow had pulled back further, leaving the ground uneven but visible. His car didn't slow when it reached the gate. It stopped late. Too late. Gravel kicked up around the tires as he stepped out. Tall, rough edges, the kind of presence that carried its own weight without needing to prove it. Hannah saw him first. She didn't freeze. She didn't move forward either. She just stood there. "Noah's inside," she said quietly, without turning. Ethan nodded. He didn't go in. The man walked toward them. "You've been hard to find," he said. His voice dragged slightly, not from weakness, from certainty. "You're coming with me." Hannah shook her head. "No." Simple, clear. The man laughed once. "You don't get to decide that." He took another step. That was enough. Ranger moved, fast, direct. He closed the distance in a second, stopping just short of contact. No bite, no impact, just a presence so immediate it forced the man to stop. Ethan stepped forward then, not in front of Hannah, not behind her, beside. "You've said what you came to say," Ethan said. His voice stayed level, no threat in it, but no space left either. The man held his ground a moment longer. Then something in his posture shifted. Not fear, recognition. He stepped back. "Doesn't end here," he muttered. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. The answer was already there. The car left the same way it came, fast, unresolved, but gone. Hannah sat down slowly after, not from fear, from release. Ethan stayed near, not touching, not speaking, just close enough. "You didn't have to do that," she said after a while. Ethan shook his head once. "Yes, I did." That was all. Winter ended without ceremony. The snow melted, the ground softened, life returned in small, steady ways. The farm changed, not because it became something new, because it was no longer empty. They didn't decide anything out loud. There was no moment where everything shifted. It happened in the ordinary, in the days where neither of them left, in the nights where the house held more than silence. They stayed. That was enough. The wedding was simple. No crowd. No promises that needed to be spoken loudly. Just a choice. Made quietly, held consistently. Years passed. A second child. A girl. More movement. More life. More reasons to stay. Ranger slowed with time, his steps less sharp, his reactions measured in longer pauses, but he remained at the door. Always. Watching. Not guarding an empty place anymore. Protecting something that had been built. Not from force, but from not turning away. Some lives don't change because of grand decisions. They change because, one day, someone chose not to walk away. Ethan didn't become a different man overnight. Hannah didn't find safety all at once. But in the quiet, ordinary moments, staying instead of leaving, standing instead of turning away, something real was built. Maybe that's how grace works in our lives too. Not always loud, not always obvious, but present in the people who stay, and in the courage to let them. If this story meant something to you, share your thoughts below. And if you'd like more stories like this, you're welcome to stay and subscribe. Wherever you are, may you find the strength to stay when it matters, and the peace that comes from not facing life alone.